Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Shanahan, the recently released Missile Defense Review directed a study on operationalizing the Aegis Ashore site at the Pacific Missile Range Facility, PMRF, on Kauai. You and I discussed this. I have some significant concerns about what operationalizing the site would do to PMR's ability to meet its testing mission, which I assume you agree is important. You can.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Senator. And
Thank you.
the
I'll get to the question.
all right.
As well as the impact of removing that testing capacity from PMRF. So briefly, could you tell us how operationalizing the Aegis Ashore site in Kauai would add to our ability to defend Hawaii from missile threats, especially as the major missile threat to Hawaii would be an ICBM, and the Aegis Ashore is not set up to counter ICBMs?
My understanding of the request in the MDR is that it's a study to assess taking the test assets and operationalizing them. And as you well point out, the ground-based mid-course defense system that is resident in Alaska defends Hawaii. I believe that the study will look at what are other threats that may be posed to Hawaii and how there might be a layered defense. But as you pointed out, the test range there is vital capability and capacity for developing our missile defense systems.
So I want to make sure that my concerns are in the record. For Secretary Shanahan and General Dunford, 2 weeks ago, before this committee, General O'Shaughnessy, the Northern Command commander, testified that the current situation at our southern border is, to quote him, not a military threat. Do you agree, Secretary Shanahan, that the situation in the southern border is not a military threat?
Senator, you're referring to General O'Shaughnessy's testimony?
Yes.
Yeah. What I recall from his testimony is he said that it is not a military threat. He said border security is national security.
I understand that, but he said specifically that it's not a military threat. I'm asking you whether you agree with him that it's not a military threat.
I agree with him.
General Dunford?
I agree. It's a security challenge, not a military threat.
So you testified, Mr. Secretary, that there are 6,000 troops currently deployed at our southern border. Can you tell us how long they're going to be there?
I'd say 30 or 40% of them will be departing in the next month or so when they complete some of their work, and I believe we'll probably draw down to between 3,000 and 4,000.
Is this something that the President is indicating to you, or can he say that I want you all to remain at the border?
You know, this was part of the tasking from the Department of Homeland Security, and based on their request to us.
From the President? From
the Department.
Yes. Let me get on to a matter that is of great concern to a lot of us, actually. Secretary Shanahan, in your response to Senator Inhofe's question about refueling the Truman, you stated that growing the workforce in the shipyard is a priority, and the move to not refuel the Truman would save $3.4 billion over 5 years. And how does canceling 3 years of shipyard work grow the workforce there?
Yeah, the workforce, when we look at what is in the shipyards, so the combination of submarines, new carriers, and then maintenance, all that is done in the same shipyards, and that workforce moves from project to project. So when we look at the total employment, the actual total employment goes up over the period of time in which we're building the two carriers.
You know, frankly, as I talk with some of the people from the shipyards, I'm not so sure that that is the case. And it'll cost about $3.4 billion to refuel the Truman, which, by the way, by not refueling, we're only getting about 50% of the Truman's service life. So at the same time, there's $3.6 billion in the emergency fund, which you acknowledge is going to be set aside. You want us to authorize setting that aside for the wall. So doesn't it make sense, maybe I should ask this of General Dunford, that we should use the money from the emergency funding that you're requesting us to set aside for the wall for something, i.e. the refueling of the Truman, that actually fits with the NDS and that your combatant commanders want? General Dunford, would you like to respond?
Senator, I would, and I'm not trying to be evasive, but I think my responsibility is to identify for the Secretary the priorities within our top line, not to identify what the top line is and not to identify how the money within the total top line ought to be allocated.
Well, I would say probably if you all had your druthers, if you could get some money to refuel the Truman, you would do so, wouldn't you?
Again, if I look at it through the military dimension alone, that would be true, but I have to acknowledge that the Secretary and the President have broader responsibilities than I do.
Yes, like building a vanity wall. Thank you.